Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui o tātou. Ko Tina Hale Pennington toko ingoa, ko te kaiwhakahare mātua o te kahui whaihanga aho. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora e te whānau and welcome to today's RIBA Global Exchange, the impacts of COVID-19 on the way we practice architecture. I'm Tina Hale Pennington, the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Institute of Architects. A warm welcome from Aotearoa, New Zealand to today's virtual audience, wherever you are joining from around the world. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be the host of this fourth and final topic of the 2021 RIBA Global Architecture Exchange series. The Global Architecture Exchanges were developed in 2020 and are a partnership between the American Institute of Architects, the Australian Institute of Architects, the Architectural Society of China, the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects, the Council of Architecture and Urbanism in Brazil, the Japan Institute of Architects, the Korean Institute of Architects, the New Zealand Institute of Architects, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and the Royal Institute of British Architects. In this fourth forum, we will hear perspectives from our experts from 6 different countries in Europe, Asia and Australasia on how COVID-19 has changed the way we practice and design, how the profession has demonstrated its resilience, what were and are the challenges. Today's speakers will share their insights into the impacts of the pandemic on their profession and the perspectives from their part of the world through their work. Opportunities like the RIBA Global Architecture Exchange are made possible through the generosity of the profession. I'd like to acknowledge and thank every speaker who has participated and kindly shared their perspectives through the events organised in 2021. I will introduce individually each of the speakers ahead of their presentations. Before we move into the sharing session, a couple of housekeeping announcements from me. Each of the speakers will have around 6 minutes for their presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask a question at the end of today's presentations. If you do wish to ask a question, please type this into the question box. We will attempt to get through as many questions as possible. However, if your question is not answered, a record of it will be kept and we will be in contact to answer that if it's possible. For any inquiries or queries throughout today's presentation, please do not hesitate to contact the team at the RIBA. The details are on your screen. So a big welcome to our first speakers from Grafton Architects in Ireland. We're joined by Anne Henry, Fiona Hughes and David Healy. John Farrell and Shelley McNamara co-founded Grafton Architects in 1978, having graduated from the University College Dublin in 1974. The practice has received numerous awards, including the inaugural RIBA International Prize for the Universidad Integra Technology in Lima, Peru in 2016. The RIAI Gold Medal for Bocconcini University, Milan, the RIBA Royal Gold Medal in 2020 for Le Caire à Yon, Prize for the Best Building in France, with Viano Zilio Architects for Toulouse School of Economics and the Kingston University London Townhouse won the RIBA 2021 Sterling Prize. David Healy is an Associate Director at Grafton Architects and has been with the practice since 2011. Previous experience includes working with the Hingham and Payne Architects in 2009-10 and working as a studio tutor and occasional lecturer at UCD School of Architecture. David is a graduate of UCD School of Architecture. Fiona Hughes is an Associate Director at Grafton Architects and an Assistant Professor in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy at UCD. After graduating from UCD in 2004, Fiona has worked in private practice with Simon Walker Architects, GCA, Otis and Grafton Architects and worked on numerous national and international award-winning projects and competitions. At UCD, Fiona has contributed to and led studio lecture courses introducing innovative teaching approaches, emphasising the linkages to practice. Fiona has been an invited lecturer to the architecture schools in Ireland. And finally, Anne Henry. Anne has been part of the team in Grafton Architects since 2014, working on the Institut Mines Telecom, IMT Paris and Saclay, the redevelopment of the ESB heads offices, Fitzwilliam Street, Dublin, and most recently the Marshall Building for the London School of Economics in Lincoln Inns Fields, London. Her previous experience includes working with Donoghue Diamond Architects and Scott Talon Walker Architects in Dublin. As a graduate of the UCD School of Architecture, Anne has worked in London and Paris, and as an undergraduate then in New York. 2014, she completed a diploma in building information modelling technologies and is a passive house designer accredited. Anne Henry will be speaking first. Anne, can I please hand over the screen to you?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introductions, and thank you very much for asking us to speak today. When we were asked to talk on the subject of practice in the pandemic, we thought to share with you our experience of working on a large building that was on site at the time, and it's a project in London, the Marshall Building, and it was on site at the time that the pandemic struck in March 2020. So at that time, we left our office like so many other people, and we packed up all our computers into the back of taxis, and we naively wondered how we would manage for just a couple of weeks at home. And of course, that wasn't how it ended. And we cobbled together workspaces at home and homeschooling arrangements. And but at the time, there was no real significant break in the work that we had to do on the project. So we really had to hit the ground running on this project and figure out a new way of working. And technology was obviously the tool that allowed this to happen. So just to give you a little bit of background on the project, in 2016, Grafton Architects won a competition to design a new university building for London School of Economics and Political Science in London. The building is a major new development for LSE, establishing a new presence for the university onto Lincoln's Inn Fields as part of their campus in the heart of London. You can see in the slide just where it's marked out there. The principal design team members are ourselves, Grafton Architects, AK22 as structural engineers, and Chapman BDSP as MEP consultants, with construction by design build contractor Mace. Next slide. At approximately 18,000 square meters, the building houses lecture theatres, teaching spaces, informal study spaces, offices for academics, PhD students, and for the Marshall Institute, and a large sports hall in the lower ground floor, squash courts and associated sports facilities, music rehearsal and arts facilities. Next slide. And then given the variety of uses, the idea was to make a structure which would creatively deal with the need to transfer from smaller spans at the upper levels and to the ever increasing spans at ground and lower ground levels. And this led to a weave of tree-like columns and beams, which direct the forces of gravity to the ground through an increasing outward spread of the diagonal branches. Under these tree branches, there's a large open space, a great hall at the ground floor, which provides new social space for the university. And this is one of the kind of early design drawings that convey this tree-like structure. So you can see here that these are photographs of the site when in March 2020, and you can see that the structural frame was well underway, and you can see there the tree-like structures, the formwork for those. And this is the stage the site was at when everybody had to down tools and move home. So as you can imagine, it was a very, very busy time for the team, and it was the workload was very significant. This included drawing reviews, contractor meetings, production of set out information, etc. And our team were all based in Dublin, and we had been travelling frequently to the site. Can move to the next slide. So this is just a little diagram showing, our workload and the pandemic in conjunction with one another. So when the lockdown came into force in Ireland, it coincided, as I said, with a very busy period, and the site really only shut for 2 weeks, and design work continued during that time. So we had to really seamlessly migrate to remote working. And there were no more visits to London, and in fact, in Ireland, we couldn't travel more than 2 kilometres from our desks. So it was quite a different scenario to what we'd been used to. So the question was, how would we maintain or even improve the quality of our service in this period?
So site inspections became our first challenge. After a short period when COVID struck, we were able to resume site inspections, but now with the help of local and trusted architects, Anne Bassett and Adam Pivoy. This is a photograph of Adam. on site wearing all the equipment required for a virtually relayed site visit during a global pandemic. So you have the normal safety equipment. You have a selfie stick, a video for a video conference on his phone, a Wi-Fi booster, a camera, and of course a mask. So it's not easy. Next slide, please. For this period, when site visits were conducted in person by Anne and Adam, and then virtually by the team in Dublin, we had to trial different methods before we hit on the one that worked. And in the end, they consisted of about 3 parts. Firstly, the person on site was given time to just walk the site, to just take the building in as normal. After that, there followed a live video conference with the team in Dublin, the advantage of that being that they had all the drawings and specifications at their fingertips. And then finally, as it would happen, there was areas where there was no Wi-Fi or mobile data. So for this, we would take videos to analyse them further back in Dublin. And what's interesting about this process is that this has informed some of our more recent site visits, so there was something to be learned from it. Next slide, please. These images are of the north elevation, which faces on to Lincoln's Inn Fields. And you'll see the large 3-storey panels being erected by Techrete on site. The panels that were produced made for this building were produced in Dublin by Techrete. So luckily enough, we were able to visit the factory floor before COVID hit to see these actual panels. And then it was a real joy when we were eventually able to return physically to site again to see them in their final destination, reflecting the midday and evening sun in London as they were intended.
Back in the office, we continued to produce information for site, as Anne talked about, set out drawings, details, sketches, and so on. We migrated our Revit models, which is how we worked, to a cloud platform to facilitate access from multiple locations around Ireland. But otherwise, our processes remained unchanged. Producing drawings for models continued to maintain coordination across our team, including our engineers and design and build contractors in the UK, and the only major change was that our rate of printing dropped to 0. As we went remote, our in-office communication was replaced by messaging platforms, temporarily WhatsApp, followed by a migration to the online platform Slack. To mimic the office environment, we ensured that all comms were held in open channels visible to the whole team, and this had the advantage that all members of our team became aware of topics that were ongoing, which supported learning and allowed awareness of interrelated issues across topics. This also fostered a sense of team endeavour when people were quite separated from each other. Next slide. As contractor meetings went remote, whereby we used to previously travel to London for these, we found there to be more ups than downs. We found a huge advantage was that the right people could attend, attendees were not tired from travel, and people were focused on the material presented on screen. Post-meeting follow-up also happened sooner as people weren't immediately running for a train or a plane. And then a huge advantage was that we honed our on-screen sketching skills.
So another challenge was how to monitor the quality of materials for the project without being able to visit yards. And as Fiona, so stone yards, quarries, etc. But as Fiona had said there, we were fortunate in the timing in that we had already chosen mixed designs for the concrete, and the stone had generally been agreed pre-pandemic. And what we had to do then was arrange for facade consultant representatives in the UK to carry out quarry visits and we'd attend by video link. And I think, you know, physical on-site expertise for these visits, it cannot be really replaced by technology to judge what the tone or the consistency or the quality of the material is. So we were fortunate that we were able to have a representative in the UK to carry this out for us. Next slide. And then similarly, the period during which no travel was permitted for us coincided with an intensive period of sample reviews and approvals and benchmarking. And again, this is something that we were very fortunate that we did have a representative who could carry out these reviews for us while the team in Dublin attended by video link. And where feasible, what we tried to do was have duplicate samples sent to Dublin, which was very beneficial, but obviously that couldn't always happen because there wouldn't have always been time to have that arranged. So I think colour selection, texture, and the ability to view samples together and physically within a site context was possibly one of the more challenging things for the team in Dublin. As part of the process, I think we felt that that was one of the things we found difficult. Despite having a representative that was able to view those things for us in person, it still was something that you felt you were missing. And Fiona, next slide.
So when it was safe to do so, we were delighted to visit site again in person. It was fantastic to be able to stand in the space of the Great Hall, connecting Lincoln's Inn Fields to Portugal Street and Portsmouth Street beyond, and to see the concrete trees reaching up through the floors to bring light in. So naturally, ultimately, there is no substitute to being able to stand in the physical space of architecture. Next slide, please. What had been interesting about the site visits in recent months is that our experiences during 2020 have informed the process today. We could see the advantages of the dialogue between the site and the office setting. It means that the personnel most attuned to a certain part of the building or a certain detail on the project can join the site visit remotely, and they can jump in and out during the day of the site visit. So their knowledge and expertise can inform the inspection, resulting in a much more collaborative approach for the team. Next slide, please. We are now nearing the end of our inspections, and for these final inspections, we're using a new tool for us, BIM 360 Field, which is an online software that keeps all photos, descriptions, and location pins from the inspections in one virtual space. And we have to say it has been a joy to see the project unfold up close and personal on site. Physically over the last number of months. Next slide, David.
This is a picture from one of the first times I returned to site physically in August of this year, once the European-wide travel ban was lifted. Ultimately, it was amazing to see it, and the building came together better than I think any of us could have imagined. A number of factors worked in our favour in this regard, but especially the exceptional team of contractors led by Mace and the visionary client team at LSE. Next slide. All the managers, designers and craftsmen within all these companies were fully committed to delivering a product of exceptional quality, even in the face of the challenges of the pandemic. And across the whole team, we found that people were completely on board with learning all the new tools necessary to work in this context. And it was this spirit of cooperation that kept the wheels turning and delivered such a great result. This is a view from the webcam image that used to be updated on a weekly basis. Next slide. And then going back and looking at an early drawing of the project from planning stage, it's amazing to stand back now and see the building sitting alongside its neighbours on the square, having come to fruition in such unusual circumstances.
Thank you to David Healy, Anne Henry and Fiona Hughes for that presentation from Broughton Architects from Ireland. Now we're moving to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Rachel Rush. Rachel has led Klein to the pinnacle of health system design. Her vast experience continues to deliver the most high-profile health building projects in New Zealand. Rachel has been with Klein since 1999 and as Director of Health has led a decade of growth and excellence. An undeniable people person, Rachel has been Managing Director since 2010, employing her leadership skills to coordinate diverse groups of specialists and establish long-term connections with many leading health sector clients. Her exceptional ability to provide clarity to complex services and facilities allows her to deliver state-of-the-art functional solutions. Recently award-winning projects include Burwood Hospital redevelopment, Middlemore Hospital Clinical Services Building, North Shore Hospital, Lakeview. The groundbreaking Tiaho Mai Acute Adult Mental Health Unit sets a new benchmark for mental health facilities in New Zealand. The project has been the recipient of several awards, including the 2021 New Zealand Institute of Architects Auckland Architecture Award winning for Public Architecture category, the 2021 New Zealand Commercial Project Award Gold Medal and National Category winner, a true testament to the innovation and passion. Rachel's commitment to design excellence extends to a founding membership role of the New Zealand Health Design Council, and her outstanding leadership has been recognised by the Professional Women of the Year at 2017 National Women in Construction Awards. Rachel, the screen is yours, and welcome.
Thank you, Tina. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora and Pomario, good evening for those of you in the Pacific, and Atamarie, good morning for those of you in Europe. It's lovely to be able to join you for this reflection on the impacts of COVID-19 on the way we practice architecture. I'm going to not talk so much about our own practice experience, but more about some reflections from a project of ours that was completed in 2020, and consider the themes that informed its design and the potential relevance of these for practice and design in a COVID impact world. You could go to the next slide. Tiaho Mai means the light that comes from the moon and the stars shines here. Tiaho Mai is an acute mental health unit on a major public hospital campus in Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau, New Zealand's largest city. It has a fast-growing population and serves a diverse community with a significant number living in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation. As has happened throughout the world, high needs and Indigenous communities have been impacted the most by COVID, and mental illness also inequitably impacts on our most vulnerable communities, our gender diverse, our ethnic minorities and disabled. The project replaced an existing building on the same site with a new single-loaded corridor courtyard design, delivering light, air and ventilation right into the heart of a large building, inverse to the hub and spoke plan that was pretty typical in New Zealand at the time, with dark corridors and dead ends. The benefits of this kind of model are dramatic for our COVID impacted world, with space, light, volume and good ventilation being so critical. A lot of architecture aspires to design environments for the best of times in life. Our houses are places for raising families and leisure and celebration, but in health, and when designing particularly for mental health, we're designing for people who are at their lowest, at their sickest and at their most vulnerable. And the last 2 years have thrown this into the starkest light possible. Design of buildings that discourage that, that improve better mental health. Mary O'Hagan is an author with lived experience of mental health, and in her book Madness Made Me, she describes her experience on admission to a mental health facility. That acuteness of that experience leading to admission is traumatic enough without the added trauma created by the first impression of the facility that you're about to enter. And admission became one of the strongest themes to emerge from evidence gathered by our client in the co-design process they did for the project. This quote, there's a quote captured in the co-design process. So the contrast, I guess, for us in terms of how could we improve that experience? So the shape, form, volume, scale, sense of welcome of the building itself, making it much more of a community kind of welcome in terms of the building, was going to go some way towards transforming that experience of admission. Simple acts like offering a cup of tea on arrival could transform that experience for the service users. So that rich co-design process that the client went through informed a number of spaces that dealt with admission on the project. And one of these was Ngāwhetu Marama, which is a whare space. It was informed by that rich information gathered in the co-design process. It is used on admission, and it facilitates tikanga practices and protocols that are respectful and familiar to Māori. This quote's an example of one of those ones that was gathered in the co-design process. These vivid descriptions were captured from 80 past patients and their families using forums and structured telephone and face-to-face interviews, written feedback that helped people tell their stories. User experiences were documented by the team and themes emerged, mapping emotional highs and lows. This rich material really allowed us as architects to step into another's shoes. In an increasingly divided world, gathering information that allows you to do this will be increasingly challenging, but more important in our COVID impacted world. From the dark, depressing kind of ideas out of that rich experience informed a qualitative brief that became really important in later stages of the project. So those design principles that are emphasised here around choice, the importance of admission, light, all things again critical for our designing for our most vulnerable. But what does it really mean to design for dignity and choice? There are some obvious ones, having your own ensuite bathroom, for example, a single room for privacy, or even a perception of privacy in social areas. But choice in mental health also means having simple things like a place to sit in your own room that is not your bed, a sunny window seat in a corridor at a safe distance from others, a place to gauge what your surroundings are before entering them, a space to be where the TV is not dominating. But perhaps obvious and most difficult to achieve, particularly in healthcare settings, is the transformative impact on our experience is natural light, warmth of the sun, a view to the trees, and an ability to open a door to the outside. Again, on reflection for a COVID impacted world, a mental health facility where people can often be contained and constrained and perhaps not able to leave within a single environment, perhaps lockdown, I guess, of a version. What are the qualities we need in a space in which we are locked down? Natural light, connection to the outside, space and ventilation. Transforming the patient experience in mental health is particularly challenging because of the constant tension between care, control, rehabilitation and safety. The client team on this project committed significant time and thought during design to pursue a solution that achieved that balance of safety and engagement while avoiding sort of fishbowl glass enclosures and this message of us and them. Again, a COVID theme is that emphasis on social connection, and the client in this project completely transformed the way their staff work. These open bases that you can see out here, instead of being staff behind a glass counter, with spaces where they would sit side by side and promote that connection. Finally, I guess one of the things that makes me think really deeply about COVID in terms of an impact is the contrast between what that's done to many of our work environments where we've been sent home to what it means for staff who work in hospitals. And their work experience and the spaces provided in hospitals are often very impoverished anyway compared with those for other work environments. But when you reflect on what that might be like for them now, it's impossible to imagine the tension and the need to be able to get out of a space where you've been working with COVID conditions. Finally, all of us will, if we haven't already, will be a patient at some point in our lives. We come in all shapes and sizes. I think we will all bring those different perspectives. I think capturing and sharing that experience and creating that qualitative evidence to inform our practice is something that certainly we took a lot from this particular project, but I certainly think it'd be even more important in the post-COVID or COVID impacted world, creating better outcomes and a more equitable society.
Thank you, Rachel, for that presentation. We're now travelling to South Korea, and I am joined by Hee-Shin Park from Studio Heech in South Korea. Hee-Shin Park received his Master's Graduate Diploma in Postgraduate Professional Studies at the Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL, where he was a recipient of the Bartlett Travel Scholarship to travel to Finland and study the work of Alvar Aalto in 2010. After graduating from the Bartlett, he went to work for Hopkins Architects. His works were exhibited at the Royal Academy in London. He established Studio Heech in Seoul in 2017, and Studio Heech won in 2020 the Korean Institute of Architects Award, South Korea's Best New Building of the Year. Hishin, you may now start your presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hee-chan from Studio Hitch in Seoul. So today I'm going to talk about our recent project presenting our view as an architect's practice regarding post-pandemic public space. So we, as a young practice, we have 4 staff, and then young growing practice, we really want to experiment our idea, reflecting our lesson learned from the pandemic. South Korean cities never had experienced the full lockdown, so we didn't experience that kind of a severe kind of disruption. But the practicing architects in South Korea experienced those things here. Not yet completely back to normal, but a kind of normal life have gradually returned here. We think one of the most significant issues has been disconnection. As an architect, we felt disconnected to fabrication and making things, disconnected to other creative professions, and also we consider the people felt disconnected to other people living in the city. So we want to confront that disconnection and want to propose a new types of public place to present the city's view after the pandemic. We want to have creative collaboration with other creative professions and do creative material research for sustainability. Then early May this year, unexpectedly, we had a chance to explore those things. We won a competition to design a 3-month temporary installation called Seoul Urban Pinball Machine. The site is located in historic city center of Seoul. As you can see here, the empty existing slope of Seoul Hall of Urbanism and Architecture. We would like to explore new types of public space as well as a landscape that can experience the existing physical the slope. The physical model we produced during the competition stage. This model is kind of a means of experimentation for creating a new landscape as an urban playground, using the existing slope. On the existing slope, we proposed a 9-meter by 18-meter size, a big giant outdoor pinball machine was installed with the objects and furnitures made by using eco-friendly materials. This system is a 1-meter by 2-meter, very light panel with the interactive systems, so that trace and interact with people's behavior and the movement of ball, and it becomes an urban playground, allowing visitors playing an outdoor game. The game field becomes a stage for play, and visitors become participants in urban play through the act of walking, running, dancing, sitting, and resting in their own way. The idea of the project was drawn from the initial question, what the public space and public installation projects needs to be like after the pandemic, which our city has never experienced. That's the kind of installed now. The project is a landscape consists of public furniture, the objects and playground, where the different material and textures of the city can be experienced virtually and physically. The visitors can launch a ball that travels up and down through the game field, which has printed graphics and objects expressing symbolic places and buildings of Seoul. The project was completed through the collaboration with the creative engineers. Their components and joints were all designed for ease of assembly and disassembly of this purpose. almost all elements were prefabricated and installed on-site in order to reduce the environmental impact generated at the construction site. The proposed objects were made by using various recycled and upcycled materials, the old leftover structural timber beams used, and then bioplastic objects were using discarded duck egg yolk were also made. This is an attempt to represent a new perspective of our city after the pandemic and create a new public place where the civic community shares its confidence in urban resilience. The project will be dismantled and will be moved and reinstalled to a landscape park just outside of the Seoul a month later. I think I sent the video clip showing the people's how people play that space. So I think last month a group of the architecture students visited the site and they have the pinball game together. Thank you.
Thank you, Hee-Shan, for that presentation. Our next speaker is from the Netherlands, Marjolein van Egg from Bureau van Egg, Netherlands. In 2014, Marjolein van Egg founded Bureau van Egg, which receives various prizes and nominations for her realised work in a short period of time. The office is known for projects that are nuanced and fit into the environment, while at the same time surprising and excelling in form, use of materials, and detailing. Since 2013, Van Egg has been writing about architecture for various media. Van Egg regularly participates in architecture juries and is a guest lecturer at the Rotterdam Academy of Architecture and TU Delft. The screen is yours, Marjolein.
Yeah. Thank you, Tina. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's great. I have vision and sound, so sorry about all the troubles. Thank you for being here. I have a small office in Holland with 5 people, but when COVID struck, we all had to work at home. Just to introduce myself, we're doing very different kind of architectural stuff, mainly small special buildings within the city or the landscape outside. But also renovation projects and dwelling. So everybody's gone in my office, and there was this photographer, Sebastian van Damme from Holland, who makes very nice photos, and he thought, I'm going to the offices and look from the inside to the outside and photograph all these empty spaces, which are normally stuffed with models and everything. So he did photograph mine, but also other places. But we also worked a lot at home with my girls and my husband, trying to get everything managed during the day. They're very happy they can go back to school now because they got a bit depressed. We did a lot of walks, and I think that's where my presentation is about. Because I don't think COVID did a lot about architecture, but it did change the way we look at our surroundings. And we had to go outside a lot because we couldn't talk to each other inside the office or inside our homes. And it made me look around to all the special places that you normally not very aware of. So like a normal staircase, or this is in Milan, where there's so much richness about how to get to your building, to your staircase, how to get to your dwelling. And we did this project with Monetnock and Gersten Schulze in Utrecht, and it changed the way we looked at how do we manage these public spaces around our buildings. And it got a lot of more quality, and I think COVID did try to change that, because now we did look very well at the staircases and the way we use our route to go home, to get into our home spaces, and the way we this routing is all about. And I think that's a quality that's stressed now. And it also made us look at the Hofvogelpark, which is a monumental space in Rotterdam. It's going to be like the High Line in New York, but much smaller, not in length, but in width. So it's only 6 meters wide, and it's done by the Urbanista. And it's going to be a park about 2 kilometers all through Rotterdam. It's designed by the Urbanista. Sorry about the pixel image, but it shows how they want to make this park High Line through Rotterdam, which is a green city, but it can be a lot more greener now, and you see all these high rises. So we were asked to do the staircases up to the park. And because it's monumental, we thought about how to make it very light, because the High Line is very strong, heavy material, and it's monumental, so it should be this length of train line. And then the staircases are very light, and it lands on this, we call it a sokkel, which is a very heavy first stair. And this is going to be very specific on every location. So there will be like 7 stairs all along this new High Line. It's called the Hofvogelpark. So it's this stairs that are landing on this sokkel, which has the same material as the landings of the Hofvogel itself. And because it's so heavy, the stairs itself are very light, and they do have this curved ending and beginning to get it closed in the evening. Another thing we did during COVID, because we did have some time left, because there were a lot of projects that were closed, we started modeling our build projects, and it made us look at how we are dealing with relief, which is all about detailing and how you look at the building. So while walking during this COVID time, you also see a lot of details in buildings, and this is a bike bar we did. It's a coffee bar with like 2,000 bike storage. And the way we made it, it's on the campus of the TU Delft. It's gone, sorry. But this is another relief we made of the Lijnbaan in Rotterdam. It's in the center of Rotterdam. It's a famous a shopping area by Bakema, Van den Broek and Bakema of the 50s. And we did some renovation of 5 shops. And so we made this new facade with all the old input. So there were these concrete columns that were already there, but we lengthened them to the ground. We make this plinth of masonry and very nice brass window frames, which are lively and making it more accessible for other people. Well, this is another relief in a renovation project in near Amsterdam. It's only cardboard because of this simple material, it has this structure in it, which makes it kind of soft. By layering it, it shows the relief of the buildings and the way we work. And then the last one I think is coming is a project in Leidse Rijn, which is based on the designs of Muzio in Milan. The photos I showed you earlier are a trip I did to Milan, and these Mugio buildings are all about making this cassettes, facades, and this relief. So we did try to do that in Leidse. Last but not least, we're working on this, we're launching a book launch next week, which is a book about het detail. It's about detailing. I write a lot about architectural details, not in my projects only, but also in history and in the future and how it's done now. This book is about 30 columns, and we did our small text, and we did a lot of graphic for this book, and now it's published next week. And fortunately, in Holland now there are new rules for locking down, but we can do the book launch next week. So on the front of the book, you see this window frame, which is an abstract window frame, a historical window frame of Holland. And we made, for this 30 chapters, we made graphics. You see one on the left-hand side. It's about surfaces, like the ceiling or the wall or the floor. And on the right side, you see an introduction with a photograph of Karel Weber's building in The Hague. But we have like 30 different chapters. So when there's a new lockdown, you can buy this book and look at all the nice images. And sorry, it's in Dutch, so maybe it's just about the images. Thank you.
As the Deputy Chief Architect of Central South Architectural Design Institute, Tang Wen-Chen has been actively involved in architectural practice and research. He has contributed to projects of all scales, including the Xiamen North Railway Station, Hohhot Bus Passenger East Hub Station, China Aid Central African National Cultural and Arts Centre in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's also dedicated to research on design of transportation of architecture and transportation hub, type selection design and the creation method of large span architecture form and structure, and culture, education, sports and green buildings. He was the recipient of the Architecture Creation Awards of ASC Architectural Design Award on the 60th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Tang Wen-Chen, you can start your presentation now.
Hello, hello everyone. My name is Tang Wen-Chen. I'm from Wuhan, China. My speech title is Flexibility and Resilience of Urban Public Space in the Post-epidemic Era. Next. As we know, the pandemic showing no signs of slowing down even 2 years after the outbreak will have a profound impact on human society. COVID-19 broke out at the beginning of 2020. Wuhan went into lockdown on January. In order to cope with the spike of confirmed cases, government decided to convert the existing building into makeshift hospital in Wuhan in early February to receive patients and with mild symptoms. It is indeed the makeshift hospital that has played a decisive role in controlling the epidemic, as it not only greatly released the shortage of medical resources, but also provided a large number of medical beds in a short period of time and played a role in isolating the infected from the healthy. Next, makeshift hospital adopts enclosed management. However, compared with conventional infectious disease hospitals, it has the following characteristics. Next. First, makeshift hospital is an infectious disease hospital where the contaminated and the clean are strictly separated. Second, in order to avoid the spread of infection. Relatively high-risk places were temporarily constructed outside. Third, patients in makeshift hospital are those who can take care of themselves or lie in bed, and those who are disabled. Fourth, medical teams were temporarily established. Familiarity are lacking. Fifth, patient mobility is high. The doctor-patient ratio was low. Three features of makeshift hospital: rapidly built, large scale, low cost. Next, please. The Stadium of Wuhan Textile University is a to-be-built sports facility and an emergency place that can be transformed to meet the function of makeshift hospital during the epidemic. In the design, the flexible design considers scenarios in both normal and epidemic period. Meanwhile, new indoor passing area for patients, doctors, and nurses will be equipped with the conditions for use of the makeshift hospital during the epidemic. Flow arrangement, ambulance, testing vehicles, logistic vehicles, and doctors enter through different routes to separate doctors and patients and clean and contaminated areas. The buffer area is assembled on site, which modular panels and a mobile toilet and mobilities for combination, safe and reliable, optimized and the scenery passing process, the reserved mobile showers and toilets. The stadium is designed with natural ventilation and lighting in the hall. The underside of seats are transparent, and the slanted glass curtain walls are equipped with electric controlled and openable windows. The wind effect produced by the gradual rising slope of the stands and the thermal pressure ventilation effect of the electric opening skylight. During the epidemic, good nature ventilation effect is conducive to improving the environment in the sick area. On the roof, effectively ensure the effect of indoor nature ventilation and adjust the indoor microclimate. We standardized design. The basic modular unit of the nursing area is 2.7 and 2.8. The concise and clear guidance and indication system makes the function distinct of modular units clear and easy to identify. It is the responsibility of architects to fully recognize the problems existing in the current makeshift, summarize the experience and the lessons, and fully consider the possibility of flexible transformation in new urban public space design so that future urban public space can be easier and quickly convert into a makeshift hospital. In case of an epidemic, besides humanization intelligence, standardization, and integration should be also considered. So when the next epidemic hits, we can be methodic and confident. Thank you very much.
And as we move to our final presenter today, Neil McCormish from Scott Brown Rigg in the UK. Neil sits on the strategic board at Scott Brown Rigg and leads the Practice's Cardiff office. Having graduated from the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff University, Neil continued his research education at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College of London, in space syntax. He is currently completing his doctorate in the city and memory. Neil works across all sectors, delivering design excellence grounded in sound commercial judgment. He believes that creative and innovative solutions are generated by working closely with clients and working collectively on their aspirations, and that a critical analysis of place in the specific context will result in the most appropriate and best architectural design. Neil has been appointed to the UNWTO Scientific Committee for Sustainable Tourism, advising on this year's global conference on sports tourism in Barcelona. He is the only appointed architect in that role. Neil, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. Well, I think if there's one thing that we've learned today, that is that it's remarkable that we've got anything done over the last 2 years with the technological hiccups and interruptions that we've experienced, and I think that that's been genuine across our last 2 years of experience. Scott Brown Rigg is the oldest architectural practice in the United Kingdom. It was founded in 1910, and some of our attributes are resilience, adaptability, and to remain relevant. And I think that those attributes have been entirely appropriate for us in dealing with COVID over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. The dark grey countries are the places that we currently have projects. Our global hub is in London. We have studios in Singapore, Amsterdam, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and New York. So perhaps we were lucky in as much as we had the infrastructure in place to operate remotely with BIM models across the cloud. Our design research unit kicked into action at the start of COVID and started to look specifically about COVID related solutions, not just material science, but space and place, materiality, air movement, and the social impact of COVID. And you can probably see our pod in the bottom left hand corner. Design strategy unit was an app that we had developed about workplace environment, but we could actually roll this out and gather this as data as a web-based application to all of our clients to start that engagement process. And part of my presentation is very much about the front end and how did we manage to continue that as an architectural consideration. Apologies to my two Kiwi colleagues on the panel. My Maori is awful, but this is Mount Nongatar in Rotorua. It was a competition won with the Ngāti Whakaui, which are the local iwi, the local people. And it's an episodic master plan that we, as I say, won in competition that looked at a huge tranche of land. Interestingly, some of the stuff that we had to adapt and change during this in association with Professor Terry Stevens was ideas about a dispersed hotel facility, prefabrication, lightweight construction, using engineered timber solutions. And even in the bottom left hand corner, you can see the idea of a floating theatre that we borrowed from Aldo Rossi. So we could actually take community theatre to people around the outside of the lake. And without a shadow of a doubt, understanding place, I had the opportunity to go to New Zealand 3 times and gather the information and data first. But the design response adapted over the last 2 years about how we might respond to that. That also informed a project called the Barony in Scotland, again, a substantial master plan, and there are lots of lessons that we learned from New Zealand, but here we couldn't go to sites. We had to gather as much significant data remotely as we possibly could with drone surveys, point cloud surveys, all kinds of additional material. And it actually taught me something about myself, and that is the way in which I draw, the way in which I construct drawings, and thought about how I could layer these to inform the students and my colleagues that were still working with me in terms of how they could turn that into three-dimensional models. And this facility is all about wellness. It's all about applying ecotherapies across the site. The Rhondda Tunnel, even though this is only 30 miles away, was equally as difficult to get to in lockdown. In fact, a policeman told me that architecture wasn't necessary and that there was no need for me to go to site. But this is about a community art facility that occupies a 2-mile long tunnel that wraps itself right the way through a mountain in Rhondda, and digital communications, digital art, a perception of art that actually engages with the community and wellness, and even the ventilation shafts we turned into musical instruments and an observation tower to review that whole fantastic landscape that is only 30 miles away from the Cardiff studio, but it might as well have been Rotorua. And you can see here, this is the wellness and ecotherapy facility that plugs into the tunnel, and the tunnel becomes the world's longest digital art facility. So it's very responsive to landscape and place, and it was fortunate enough that we knew a lot about the site prior to that investigation. This is a scheme out in Turtle Bay in Dakhla, Morocco, on the Western Sahara, an old iron foundry founded by the Spanish, and this looks and develops some of those ideas that we had already investigated in both Rotorua and in the Barony. And it uses, again, a whole series of motifs about how we can develop sustainable tourism after the pandemic, but also including considerations about the pandemic. So it's a kite surfing facility, and the kite surfing centre uses the Arabic mishrabiyah as a motif that wraps over what is effectively reclaimed and sustainable timber that's put on the beach. This has interesting technology, cardboard moisture capture, sea house, greenhouses that enable us to have a circular economy and to feed the community on site, as well as hospital, local school. And as my colleagues at Grafton explained, doing all of that in terms of the upfront design and how that manipulates itself onto site. This is a big scheme in Russia. It's very difficult to keep those processes going, but the uses of BIM, BIM Cloud, BIM 360 have informed us. And finally, a big wind turbine concept that was a World Architecture Festival Award winner in the middle of Fifth Avenue. This actually goes down underground. It acts as both a generator for energy, a tourist attraction, but also a transportation hub that goes down through the medians and connects up. And finally, really a question, once the pandemic is finally under control, will we return to air travel again? Will we return to mass movement through the air? And this was a concept scheme that we did prior to COVID for London's 6th terminal based on a shark skin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to all of the presenters on today's presentation, and thank you for your patience and adaptability in terms of the technology today. We might launch into a couple of questions in terms of the presentations today, and the first one would be from the team from Grafton in Ireland. What was the client experience during the impacts and changes that were experienced in terms of the site lockdown and COVID impacting your project, the Marshall Building?
Yeah, so the client LSE, it was interesting because actually the site didn't really close for a great period of time. So the project kept going. But one thing that they did do is they turned to all the design team members, but in particular Chapman BDSP, who are looking at the MEP side of the project to analyse the building with the kind of thinking of if a future pandemic happened or if they had to open the building, as will be the case while we're still dealing with it, what could they do? So Chapman's did a full review and every other designer did a review as well. What came out of it was that there's a lot of offices and classrooms in the project, as Anne pointed out, but a lot of them are naturally ventilated by just simply opening a window. And because that was the basis for the design, the initial analysis was that actually it was in good stead because you can open a window. And some of the other classrooms where there aren't windows opening, there is and natural air circulated into the space. So they came up with a number of things, but one of the ones was that during an outbreak that you wouldn't be using recirculated air, and retrofitting screens into reception desks and desks in offices so that you could take them out and put them back in easily. So they were very hands-on and very kind of practical about what they could do to manipulate the design to take account of a possible future pandemic.
Thank you for that. Next question I'd like to offer up to Hee-Shin Park from South Korea. In terms of the work that you were doing, I'm wondering what, if anything, you will carry on doing and worked well in future years and looking ahead.
As a young practice, we keep connect with other creative professions, such as makers, new kind of material scientists, and the fabricator. And then we really want to closely work together with other professions. That gives us more opportunity to make some kind of new experience in public space.
Thank you. Marjolaine, your presentation noted that COVID created more time to go walking and experiences with nature. I'm wondering how that time and that time in thought space might influence your writing and detailing.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about this walking is that you have a time and quietness to look around, while otherwise you're always rushing to your goal. Now you're really looking around in your own city, and it does make you realize that it's nice to have all these different scales of detailing. So when looking far away, you see the city, but looking more closely, you see other details. And it makes me aware of how important all these different scales are. It also makes you aware of new details to write about. So that's good.
Thank you. Moving closer to home and Aotearoa, New Zealand, Rachel, I was wondering and interested in your thoughts around how COVID and health architecture and the working environment for health professionals might change given the experiences of COVID and those continuing.
We're a bit fortunate in New Zealand in the sense that we haven't really had to deal with it, COVID, on our shores in any way, shape or form like the rest of the world, but we have now. So it's in Auckland now. And again, I think we're up to I think we've peaked at 220 cases in one day. So I know the rest of you who've been living in Europe will think that's tiny, but it's finally arrived on our doors. And so our hospitals are really only now having to sort of grapple with higher case numbers. And I guess, so there's a couple of things, a couple of reflections, I guess, about maybe a good side of COVID for how hospital staff, or not just hospital staff, but healthcare staff have had to operate. It is, I think it will kickstart technology for our environment here in New Zealand. GPs will have had to start doing virtual consultations, which is something that they probably should have been doing a lot more of historically. Although they want to get the balance right and make sure they're still seeing people in person, but they could probably have been doing a lot more of that in the past. So I think it has changed the way some healthcare professionals work in some ways for the better. Within hospitals, though, that's one thing. You're never going to be able to do that except face to face. And I do fear for our very constrained hospitals in New Zealand, and we have very, very poor quality staff environments generally within public hospitals in New Zealand. I'm not sure what it's like in other parts of the world, but we don't have that many hospitals that have actually allowed good space for staff to either have break space or be able to get out into the gardens or outdoor areas. You know, many of our hospital campuses are fairly poorly served on that front. Yeah, so.
Thank you. Neil, I was interested in your presentation. You made note of your practice, resilience, adaptability. In the third one, I didn't jot down that quickly, but I wondered whether those three will still maintain in terms of the focus, or there's any changes to those given the experiences we've all lived through of late.
Well, Tina, I think they're relevant to us as individuals, let alone as a practice. And as I said, we've got probably the thick end of 200 architects across the globe. So we had to have that remote infrastructure in place to start off with. Having said all of that, I think what COVID has taught us is that when we're pushed, you know, humanity has the opportunity to respond to the necessity through invention, haven't we? And you would like to think that we can do that with the next existential threat, which is climate change. You know, that hasn't gone away over the last 2 years, but the way in which we have responded to COVID proves that a community and collective and collaborative effort seems to me to indicate that we can deal with those issues, and we can deal with them strategically at a global level, despite what some of our political leaders might think.
I think you may have many people joining us virtually who would echo those sentiments, Neil, so thank you for sharing those. And my final question was going to be directed towards Tangwen Chen from China. I was wondering, from your experiences, what would you say was one of the biggest lessons that has been learnt through the current times for you and practicing architecture?
From my experience, I think that for buildings, especially used in the pandemic era, the buildings, the main characters of the buildings needs to be resilient and flexible. It can be converted into the pandemic use building at the shortest period of time. This is most important. And also, besides the natural ventilation, the natural light is very important because we're facing an epidemic era that we need to keep infections outside. Because the biggest, I think the biggest method to cope with COVID is natural ventilation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. And I'd like to draw today's session to a close. It's been an inspiring session. There's plenty of lessons and messages in there for the profession and equally for clients in terms of working with architects. So I want to thank each of the presenters for making their experience and knowledge available to those online today. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working as part of the Global Architecture Exchange platform of the RIBA and collaborating with each of the institutes that participate. Without their support, we wouldn't be all here today. So a huge thanks to everybody involved. I thought, given that we are hosting down from Aotearoa, New Zealand today, I thought I would leave today's audience with a Māori proverb, which I think probably goes to the sentiment of many of the presentations today, is that we have a whakatauki, which is what is the most important thing in the world. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is the people, the people, the people. And I think that has been a key message part of the presentations today. So thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed the presentations, and I do hope that we have an opportunity to welcome you down to Aotearoa, New Zealand at some point in the future. You are more than welcome to visit. So thank you.